and they could be addressed in the next 45 days. And then we would formally meet, say, yeah, what you said. That would be a possibility. So if we're all willing to step up to that plate and do what we can to bring, as I say, well articulated and integrated amendments forward.
Well, and that was the reason I asked for the complete as of the draft incorporated with what we've got, as well as the red line. Part of that's just the way I'm used to doing things, but it's also an easy way to see how it fits into the whole of that portion of the document. And well, I don't want to just be taking a periscope look at just this. I want to see it's very important to be looking at the paragraphs in between paragraph C and E and see what it says as well when we go through this.
So what, Mr. Ayers, this business of we aren't passing regulations, and obviously we will do that in subsequent months, but we're passing a master plan or a land use plan that includes recommendations for regulations. So can you talk to us about, are those two different things, or can we realistically?
See, and I think, Mr. Chair, just to butt in a little bit here, but I think that was the assumption that I had, is that they are two separate things, and that, we're not passing regulations. And so we could just say, okay, we have 30 days and then have a public hearing and then kind of do what we want. But that's not kind of, after I talked to Matt, that's not how he saw that. And so, I probably misguided the process a little bit with that, because I was like, okay, yeah, as long as we have our 30 days, then we should be good. But not realizing that maybe we should treat these more like regulations. And if we do make substantive changes, that they need to be that way. But we've kind of done things willy-nilly here, So anyways, I will defer to Matt, but that's kind of where my premise was when we kind of started these discussions with this other group.
Well, I mean, a land use plan, you're right, it does not have direct regulatory effect, but the idea is that it sets you up directly for that regulatory effect. If you look at the Wyoming Administrative Procedure Act, it's broad enough that this would likely fit under the definition of a rule, which can just be a general policy statement of an agency. So I think from a citizen perspective, if there were to be a challenge to our adoption of the plan, that could in turn take away some of essentially our rational basis for the making of regulation under an arbitrary and capricious standard, because the Wyoming Administrative Procedure Act's judicial review provisions also does allow for an attack on rulemaking, which I think that this could be. So, and there's essentially just due process concerns across the board, although this wouldn't necessarily be immediately appealable as something that is a regulation and affecting someone's property interests. I think what you said earlier is it's a thin line between what happens here and what happens there, but they are two different things. You are correct. And it's my recommendation to this body, and also just the language of 18.2.102B that deals with this commission's ability to propose plans and certified plans, is that although it doesn't directly say so, it says shall hold at least one public hearing. In my mind, that means that there is anticipation for further public hearings being held. And it's a general practice, that you put out for notice, essentially what you're going to certify. If you made huge changes to that afterwards, there's obviously a legislative intent that the public has a substantial comment time, 30 days. And if you were to just take that away, I think you would be running afoul of maybe not the express provision of that text, but certainly the intent and also just general government practices across the board.
So,
And sorry, Mr. Chair. And so the determination of what's substantive, that's a different story. There could be slight tweaks that, although maybe there could be argument that that is, a major policy determination, especially in a court of law, where it's really not. It's just, the thrust of whatever provision that is not changed. So that would be something that I think and this board, we would kind of have to look at more of an ad hoc basis on what really is a change that might run afoul of essentially the intent and just general practices of government agencies.
go ahead.
I mean, I think we are where we're at right now. We're just gonna have to follow this process the way it's started right now, with 45 days. We'll have our meeting sometime in October. We'll bring what you got, and then we could probably, as this board, meet as soon as we can after that if we need to make some changes or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I just don't know if it's realistic that we're going to do this at all these different meetings all together with these three boards all together, and I don't know. I'll have some discussions with these folks, because the whole time I think I have mentioned that it's like, planning and zoning and planning commission, they've got to do their deal, but I don't know. I mean, I was hopeful that we can kind of work these things through, and maybe we still do this, which we if we can, we should, but there's this deadline of like December 31st for whatever reason, I mean, I know the reason, but I don't know. If it needs to take a little longer, it needs to take into the next year, let's just do that, I mean, that's really where I want it to go, but I'm just one voice on a group of 5 or 6 other people that don't agree with me. Well, not necessarily don't agree with me, but we're trying to work this all together, and I was hopeful that this would work the way they wanted to, but just statutorily, and like both of you have said, it's let's do this so it sticks, so we don't get some adopted and then just gets flipped right after we get adopted because we've done some kind of procedural error, That's all.
So let me ask, does the land use plan, what if we excise Appendix J? Because the corpus of the thing is the contaminant inventory, and they brought the geology up to 2022. Would that be a viable route forward, is to not have recommended regulations as part of the land use plan? Because the comp plan, it doesn't really take it clear through to that finish line, does it? And then we come back with the plan, and then we formulate appropriate regulations. So is there a route here that, because it's the regulations that are the controversial part?
Yeah, but it essentially has no effect then, because we can't use the comp plan as a basis to make decisions. So,
well, we do make regulations based on.
we do make regulations, but we're also, I mean, essentially the gist of this is Appendix J. Whether or not the rest of it, how that becomes incorporated, because that's the only place that that changes have been made. The rest of this is essentially documentation.
But just to finish that thought, I'm thinking of zoning. We have a comp plan that says we want to favor riparian areas. That's where the comp plan stops. Then we say, as we put on our zoning regulation hat, we say, therefore, these properties are going to be zoned riparian. Does that model fit here? Yes, we were using the comp plan, land use plan to make our regulations, but those are really two separate things. Do them separately.
Right. So what I would say is the comprehensive plan is more general than these recommendations that you're getting in the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan. I mean, those are specific. Those are geared right towards our regulations. And that's how it was done the original time too. You know, we did have the prohibited use table. We did have, you know, site-specific investigation and some of those things. I think it was a little more general when we adopted it and when the county adopted in 2011 or whatever it was. But still, what's being recommended in the CAP plan in this update is very specific. It's very just like change these regulations out. And honestly, this is one of the tasks that they are supposed to be doing. This is one of those things that Stantec by contract has to do, is to provide us those recommendations. And I don't know if there's a way maybe to separate that, you know, I mean, pull them out and these are recommended regulations. They don't get, you know, they're not part of that plan. Maybe we just separate them and they give them to us as part of the package, but the plan gets adopted without them. I don't know if that's more.
Well, that's kind of what I'm
feasible,
wondering, is
you know,
that we have this consultant that we've hired to help us write regulations as a thing. And that's separate from this. We've hired these consultants to help us do a more general,
right.
Here's how the water flows, and here are things that are nasty to put in the water. I mean, I guess I'm just groping around here, but if there were a way to treat these as the two separate things that they kind of are.
Right. I mean, the typical process is you approve a comprehensive plan, and then after that, you create the regulations and approve the regulations. But with the CAP, we're kind of combining that. They're kind of intermingled a little bit, even though they're not necessarily regulation when they get approved, you know, in the plan, but they could definitely become that.
It's our choice to intermingle this.
Right.
I'm asking if it is. Okay, so we won't resolve that here, but if that's a possible strategy, that would conform with what our colleagues are hoping we can do.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this process too is like we're trying to get everybody together and kind of like make it exactly the same, but I don't think it's that big a deal if we tweak it a little bit for us and they tweak it a little bit for them. I mean, what we all each governing body has to approve them separately, you know. I don't see the big deal with that, but I mean, I get it that we want something that's similar, you know.
Right.
But if there's a little bit of difference here and there, I don't understand that. I don't know. I don't think it's a big deal. But
Fair point. What are you looking at?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think I've made my thoughts on it clear. I wrote a long email, but
So, Mr. Kennedy, would that violate your sense of that we can't use the plan to do the regulation? What's your?
No. Going ahead with the plan is fine because it isn't the regulation. And I agree with what David just said, because you have different concerns of people who live outside of the city limits of Laramie than those that live within. And it's not realistic. People who live in the county don't want to have all of the city regulations. It's that plain and simple. So there's no reason to think that they should mirror each other. They should address concerns of, yes, the county ones need to address the concerns of all of the county, but they need to take into consideration those that don't have any voice with the city as well.
And yet they should all be based on the same science. an ideal world. Which is what.
Point that world out to me.
Well, okay, I mean, but just to put some framework to this.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody
Yes.
who's drinking water from the aquifer should be able to agree on how the rain falls and runs through the aquifer and what's contaminant, what is it? So I gotta try to find a home for this joint cap. But the resolutions and the ordinance were always separate. They had to be separate. Back in 2001, they agreed on a cap, but there were separate regulations. As there have to be. Yeah. So if that's a model that works legally and ethically, maybe it should be explored. Other thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, a general regulation does not have to, in my opinion, you are not, and I have found case law from the Wyoming Supreme Court supporting this, you are not bound by the recommendations of a local land use plan. You can actually act counter to it. But I think that is a lot of the value of what we get out of plans, is that it sets us up for a clear determination of regulations. I mean, you don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel on the regulatory side. I'm not.
If you can find a way to split this baby.
And I guess I'm not philosophically opposed to those being identical, but to get to that point is going to be much more difficult. That's clear. And so,
Because add another, 8 people to this discussion, why?
yes, there were 30 people on that.
Yeah.
I find that a little intimidating.
Yeah.
When I think about committees I've served on. Well, all right, I'm not sure we aren't Lewis to make a decision here tonight, but maybe you guys could explore some of the options to help move this forward, whether it's us meeting as a group, some ideas, or is it throwing the baby out with the bathwater to say, let's improve a plan that doesn't have draft regulations?
Well, I don't see why at our next meeting, in September, we can't discuss as one of our agenda items, well, we've got any concerns with this. It seems reasonable to me.
Well, let's see what the memo, who's writing this memo? Mr. Sally.
I mean,
We surely don't take our direction for a steering
Is this
committee.
above your pay grade?
I have told the city what our requirements are and our interpretation thereof. And I don't.
We aren't taking we're not taking our marching orders from anybody at the city
You
or
agree
the
with
EAC. That's fair, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
No, but we are engaged in a cooperative effort here. And
I understand
we
that
as
too.
taxpayers have spent a fair amount of money to put this thing together. So I don't want to feel obstructionist, even though maybe I am, but I'm wanting to obey the law. Our authorities flow as they do from state statute. They don't flow to us through the EAC or the city of Laramie. All right, is there more to be said? Is that tractable? Maybe you could, you're going to be involved in the development of this memo, and you'd be able to respond to it and carry to them our concerns. Is that?
I mean, again, Mr. Chair, this was the first of such memo.
Yeah, I've heard that. I have not heard it, and I'm part of this group, so I don't know. I think this is something that maybe there's certain staff members that have started this, and they were gonna include us later, or when they have a draft, or what, but so,
Please, please.
but yeah.
Okay, so let's leave it at that. You guys.
And I'll take our these concerns to the CAP intergovernmental group or whatever, so.
Now, the notice for this meeting, I noticed we have some public, but we weren't
We put public comment on there if you
We
want
did?
to allow it, so.
Okay, well, is that agreeable to the troops here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, end of discussion, no action taken. We have staff that will sort all this out for us. Are there public comments as we close this meeting of the Albany County Planning and Zoning Commission? Ms. Starkey. Going once, going twice. Hearing none. Are there objections to adjournment? None here. Hearing none, seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you. Did anybody ever